Today we're going to be talking about rear pivoting systems. So yes, how do you choose a rear pivoting system? So this one has a traditional mushroom cap rear pivoting system. This one has my Flexi-Plate design on the rear. And this Flexi-Plate design is the upgraded version 2.0 of the Flexi-Plate, and you'll see in the links below the link to the original Flexi-Plate video that I created, so you can see how to create your very own Flexi-Plate rear pivoting system. So let's take a look first at the traditional mushroom cap pivot. So here, this is a green stabilizer that you can purchase from one of those little upgrade kits that you can get, and you'll see the link below for what I'm talking about. You can get the mushroom caps from that kit. You can get the mushroom caps from basically any upgrade kit that Tamiya has. So here, by preparing the mushroom cap itself, the stabilizer that is, the stabilizer cap, we create this thing called a mushroom cap. And here we load up a spring inside of it along with a screw that extends from the bottom straight to the top. And here is where we can like move this rear set of plates with these rollers mounted on them in this very free way. So here you can see it's tilting one direction and the other. It can also tilt upward, and it's very difficult to tilt the other way, downward. So you want to make sure that in your design you don't point these things upward, these things angled. They don't want them to be angled upwards, because supposedly then your car will course out very easily. So that was one of the big criticisms of my Flexi-Plate design, where the original Flexi-Plate allowed like a very free-form kind of movement in these rollers, and some people complained that, hey, these rollers should never be angled upward. They should be only angled straight or downward. And so I fixed that by including this solid plate right here. So as you see right here, you can see right above the posts, there is now no way to basically tilt this upward. You can only tilt it downward on each side, or you tilt it sideways like this, but not upward, because this bar here, this carbon plate bar, is blocking these plates right here. So if you take a look at this, previously the design was such that there was no bar here and you can tilt it the other way. And so a lot of people were like criticizing my design for that. But in truth, there was very little chance for the rollers to ever be aimed in the wrong direction. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, you can come up with criticisms of design, but if these things don't really hold true, then maybe that's not going to affect your design, right? But so long as there's a doubt out there, then here's my way of correcting that doubt, right? So now it's fixed. Now you get the same kind of pivoting action that you would get on a mushroom cap pivot. And here I will show you some of the movements that you can do on a mushroom cap versus my Flexi-Plate. So here we have this left and right movement. But you see here, when you move this up, this goes down. So you don't always want that to happen, right? If this goes down too much and this scrapes against the bottom of the track, then you've got some issues too. So keep that in mind. So here, you can move each of these sets of rollers up and down each side. With my Flexi-Plate, you can do that too. But individually, so it's an individual spring pivot. And there's no like lifting this up makes this go down. It's just this is an independent suspension, which makes this superior to the mushroom cap pivot. So here we have this tilt down effect, which a lot of people like, right? Because this is like very useful for it to tilt down. And here, if this is hitting the track the right way, you'll get both sets of pivots tilting forward like this. Same thing. Very, very cool. So there you go. So this basically has all the same movements, or very similar movements, to the mushroom cap pivot system right here. So very cool, very cool. So let me show you something about why this is a version 2.0 design of the Flexi-Plate. Here, I've noticed that when I inserted the bar in place, then this spring here was very much like compressed, very squashed. So I changed the spring on the other side to, instead of a black spring, I'm using a silver spring, which is the more firmer spring. So you get that piece, or those two pieces, from this thing right here. This is the Tamiya 10305 mini four-wheel drive sliding damper spring set. And yes, this is a very rare item, and it only costs $2.19, you see here, but it's a very rare item. If you find these in a Tamiya store, purchase them, because you will need these springs to be able to create either a mushroom cap pivot system or my Flexi-Plate system. Now, my Flexi-Plate system design does use more springs, totally true, than this, which you might think that, oh, economy of parts allows for less chances of breakdowns and things like that, and that is true. However, for the independent suspension kind of aspect of this whole thing, that's pretty cool, and I think that outweighs the use of the minimization of the parts, the economy of use of the parts. So yeah, it all depends on your philosophy and how you want to race, right? So I've been very successful with this Flexi-Plate system. You've seen it on Scooby-Doo, and yeah, it's pretty cool on Scooby-Doo. And now you've seen it here on Wolfie. Now on Wolfie here, this is a VS chassis. Yes, you heard that right. VS chassis with modern accoutrements. So here, you have here the front pivoting system, single pivot front pivoting system with, there you go, a damper, body damper liftoff. Very nice, right? And on the rear, instead of the mushroom cap, we have my Flexi-Plate 2.0 design. Yes, modern gimmicks on a VS classic chassis. Pretty darn cool. And if you look closely at how I did the body damper here, I redesigned the body damper so that instead of using an entire strip of car catcher material as its body damper, which leads to the body damper not being completely flat when it lands down. Sometimes it lands at a slight angle. Now it lands flat because I have here a carbon plate. Just one carbon plate is needed. And I basically used the previous body catch material design to basically mount the body onto the plate right there. And this right here mounts to the character. Very cool, yeah. And so one might criticize this as being a little heavy, and sometimes you need a little heaviness, right? Sometimes you need a little more weight in the body damper. And so because this is a little heavier, this cowl itself, that means I don't have to make this as heavy as I usually would make. So here, this is like the right amount of weight for this particular car. And so when I do a drop test on this, oh, let it sideways, back down again. And you'll also see the drop tests right here. And yeah, you'll see that it lands right into the well of the track with not very much issues. And sometimes this might get a little snagged in the rear. Right? I have this here, this underguard here that basically protects a lot of the rear. And because I'm using these kinds of dish, I think they're dish rollers, right? So because I'm using dish rollers, that also has like an underguard feature about it too. So yeah, you just have to make sure that the track doesn't snag in between the dish and the carbon plate. And there's little chance of that happening in many cases. So very, very cool. So next step here is to replace this more compressed black spring with a silver spring on like this side right here. And yeah, you'll get the performance that you'll want in 2.0. Very, very cool. Replacing a spring is pretty easy. You just make sure that you have your screwdriver and hex nut, and you just simply unwind the lock nut that's holding the spring in place. And I'll show you about alignment of the Flexi-Plate. You have to make sure that things are pretty much aligned for this to work. So here, I'm removing the black spring, and I'm replacing with this silver spring right here. And then you just insert the new spring in place, the lock nut back in place. So here, you see that it's quite crooked. You want to tighten the lock nut here such that the level, the plane of this carbon is in line with the carbon plate across here. So I'm going to tighten the screw now and align the plates so that everything's in one straight line. Okay, So it's about like this. So now this carbon plate is in one straight line with this. It might be a little off. I might need to tighten it a little bit more. But yeah, now I've got the same kind of flexiness on both sides. Flexi, flexi, yeah. And you could also add a little bit of Tamiya soft grease on the post as well, so that the spring moves up and down freely. So it's really the friction that's caused by the hole that you created with this Flexi-Plate plate right here. You want to make sure that the plate has a hole that is like loose enough so that this will slide up and down properly. And so this also has this up and down motion like this, so it can deal with digital curves. So that's pretty cool too. That's a nice little added benefit right there. So let's see. You can eyeball it and check to see that this lock nut is about the same, this purple lock nut right here is at the same level as this purple lock nut here. But don't use the eyeball technique as a kind of be-all, end-all. You want to make sure that there's a straight plane across with the plates. So I'm looking at it right now, and it looks like it's slightly off. See, it's a little bit higher than the other plates. So I'm going to tighten it a little bit, and we'll get this a little bit closer to what the ideal is. So with any new spring that you use, there's a little break-in process. So springs, yes, they're designed to just compress and release, but the more you use the spring, the looser it gets. So you want to make sure that when you first play around with the tightness or the looseness of the springs on your Flexi-Plate, that you play around with it a little bit and try to get it to settle where it should be, where the spring should be. And then once you get that settled, then you can tighten it a little bit more to the or loosen it a little bit more to the specifications that you need, so that all of the carbon plates are one straight line across. So here, eyeballing it looks very close, right? And it looks a little higher on this side still. So I'm going to tighten it a little bit more. And there you go. Here's a trick. I can hold on to this screw right here and then just use this to tighten. And it's getting better. Let's see, a little bit more maybe, one more turn. And it's a little bit better. I can also twist the spring right here to make sure that it's centered right underneath the lock nut. That's important too. So that's a secret ninja technique here. So just keep that in mind. And I have a little post, a little tiny post, silver post, aluminum that is, right in between, like inside the spring right there. Let's keep a little space right there. So let's see. I think now it's straighter. Yes, it looks pretty much straight. So yeah, now I can add this piece of rubber pipe on top, and that'll hold the whole thing in place. And now I can demonstrate to you how each side is pretty much similar or the same in flexibility. And it's got the rocking motion like I showed you a little bit earlier, and it's got the tilt forward, but it cannot tilt back. It's hard to tilt back. In fact, even a mushroom cap pivot tilts back more easily than the Flexi-Plate, making this, again, a superior design. So yeah, you could add whatever gimmick you want on the back of your cars. If you took a look at my old Wolfie car, yeah, the old Wolfie didn't have any gimmicks like that. It didn't have a pivoting system in the rear. It didn't have a pivoting system in the front. It just had static plates. And for certain tracks, that was good enough, and it was very fast. And a lot of you know that adding lots of gimmicks onto your car does not necessarily make it a super stable, like, assault weapon. We'll call it that. It does not make your car necessarily better just because you have all these wonderful gimmicks on it. It all depends on the track that you're racing on. So on certain tracks, you might not need all those gimmicks. On certain tracks, you might not need a gimmick on the front and the rear. You might just need something on the front or the rear, or none at all. It depends on the track. So you have to be able to make a good judgment, a good assessment of every track that you race on, and pick the gimmicks that work for that track. So on certain tracks, it will require gimmicks such as the front pivoting system. It will require rear pivoting system gimmicks. But not all tracks are like this. Some tracks are very straightforward and would do better with just static gimmicks than flexi gimmicks. So yeah, very, very cool. And so you see here, I've got not a tail damper that flaps, but I've got static weights on the rear here. And the way they're positioned, they're right above the flexible gimmick right here. So they just fit nicely right there. And you'll see, like in my other, like Scooby-Doo, I actually had a slightly different setup where the weights were, they sat a little bit below where they're sitting here. They basically rested on top of the plate down there. Now, the lower you get the weights, the better, because that keeps everything to the ground more. That keeps the car to the ground more, makes it more stable. So this is right now, this is about as stable as it could be. So I think that the way to make this a little bit more stable is if I drilled holes in the sides of my cowl and I just ran this plate straight through the chassis itself so that I would lower the weights a little bit more so that they would be closer to the ground. But I'm happy with this as it is. So now you might be wondering if this fits into the regulation Tamiya box, and yes it does. Very cool. With room to spare. Very cool. Now, I've seen some people design cars where, for whatever reason, they barely fit into the box, and sometimes their rollers are a little bit, like, slightly wider than they should be, and so there's not a lot of leeway room right here on the left and right, and I don't understand why, other than they mounted their rollers into the wrong hole or something. So, or maybe they used a slightly larger roller for various reasons, like they're trying to mount one of those old style rollers with the rubber rings around them, and they're mounting it into a hole where it was meant for a 13 millimeter and they're putting in a 14 millimeter roller, and so it just barely fits inside the box. You want to make sure that there's no doubt, right? You want to make sure that it easily fits into the box. So when it fits into the box, it just drops like that and drops to the very bottom. That's how you know that your car fits into the box, right? So if it fits in like this, where you have to actually push it down, then it really doesn't fit into the box. This is the regulation Tamiya box, right here. The regulation Tamiya box. You want to make sure that your car fits into the regulation Tamiya box. So a lot of you might have purchased the fake box, and the fake box is pretty useful too, right? The fake box is like less than half the price of this regulation box right here. But the regulation box is where it's at. The regulation box is what is actually used by most racing events to test the validity of your car. So you want to make sure that your car will fit into a regulation Tamiya box. Is there a big difference between the regulation Tamiya box and the fake? Very little difference, but it's potentially difference enough to make a difference. So you want to make sure that you get a regulation Tamiya box for your own reference purposes. If you want to continue using the fake Tamiya measurement box, you may, but I would suggest at some point everyone purchase a regulation Tamiya box, just because you want to really get the measurements down pat, right? You want to make sure that everything that you create fits within the actual regulation box. So yeah, it's about $20 for this, but it's well worth the price, because, you know, like, if you're going to be doing this seriously in a semi-pro or professional way, you need this regulation Tamiya box. Very, very cool. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, everybody. And if you like this video, please slam the like button, subscribe to my channel. You'll see more videos just like this one. Until next time, everybody, see you and happy racing.